Hello, hello, and welcome. Today's conversation is called Reclaiming the Well, Returning to the Source. We are going to spend the next few minutes reflecting on what it means to return to ourselves after long periods of carrying, managing, enduring, and holding together what was never meant to be ours alone. But before we go any further, let me introduce myself. My name is Makeda Crane, and I'm the founder of Feather and Scale Strategies. My work focuses on helping individuals and organizations navigate conflict, culture, and transformation that also center clarity and humanity. Now, we're going to talk today about reclaiming the well, and that really grew out of both some professional and personal reflections that I've been having. So I want to begin by naming the ground that we're standing on together. Not the aspirational ground, not the polished version of ourselves, but the real terrain of our lived lives. Now, have you ever realized that you were exhausted long after your body had been trying to tell you that? Well, this is not a productivity conversation. It is not a self-improvement talk, and it's not about pushing through one more season of exhaustion. This is a conversation about rehumanization. So I want to slow this down for a moment because many of us don't even realize how much we're really holding. So I've been thinking a lot about wells because drawing from a well isn't just about the water. It's about the quiet labor of it, what we carry, what we hold, what we sustain, what we endure. So I want to pause and I want you to ask yourself these questions. What have I been carrying lately? Responsibilities, expectations, pressures? What have you been holding together? Teams, families, businesses, communities? Sometimes simply keeping things from falling apart takes a whole lot more energy than what we acknowledge. The fatigue, the tension, the moments when the well feels deeper than usual. Because many of us have become really good at drawing from the well, but we don't always stop to ask how much we've been asked to carry, or what happens when a source is treated as bottomless. Now that question, what happens when a source is assumed to be endless, is what helped me understand the terrain I had always been walking. Now when I think about wells, I also think about something else. I think about how often Black women are treated not as human beings, but as infrastructure. And before we can begin to transform this, we first have to understand where we are standing inside of it. Now, we're expected to hold, to supply, to stabilize, to sustain, not occasionally, but continuously. And when we do it well, it is praised as strength. And when we do it quietly, it's called resilience. And when we do it without complaint, well, it just becomes expected. Rarely are we asked what that resilience cost us. Rarely are we asked what we have learned to ignore in our bodies to keep functioning. And rarely are we asked who we might have been if survival had not required so much. And if justice is what love looks like in public, as Cornel West says, then this work is about what love looks like in your own life, when no one is watching, when no one is applauding, and when no one is benefiting from your overexertion. Now, there's a truth that I keep returning to. You have to locate yourself before you can move with intention. So a few days ago, I was talking with my best friend who loves maps. Everywhere she goes, she studies the geography, the roads, right? And what she says is, you got to know where you are in the world. Now, even GPS works this way. Before it can guide you anywhere, it first has to determine your exact location. Now, one of the mathematicians whose work helped make GPS possible was a Black woman named Dr. Gladys West, who passed away earlier this year. Now, her calculations helped make modern GPS possible. Interestingly enough, she once said that Even though she helped create GPS, she still preferred her paper maps because when she used her paper map, she could see the road, where it turned, right? Where it went, and it just made her feel more sure. So navigation begins with orientation, with knowing where you are. And in some ways, you have to become your own GPS. But many of us, myself included, I have done this too, we will rush past where we actually are instead of naming where we are. We leap ahead to where we think we should be, more healed, more rested, more free. But naming where you are is not settling. It is orientation. Many of us have learned how to orient ourselves in complicated environments long before we learned how to rest inside of them. We learned how to contextualize harm, to make sense of instability. It's how we survived households and workplaces and institutions that didn't offer clarity or protection. But over time, something subtle happened. Understanding became responsibility. We didn't just understand, we managed, we absorbed. But when meaning making becomes the way we survive everything, it can quietly lead us to ignore what our bodies had been signaling all along. Now, depletion rarely announces itself. Depletion happens little bit at a time, right? So the well rarely runs dry all at once, but it thins first. Now that thinning is difficult to notice when you've been trained to keep going, when you're still showing up, when you're still responding, when you're still handling what needs to be handled. Now from the outside, nothing looks wrong, but inside, something is thinning. Now for many Black women, depletion is not the result of poor self-care. It is the predictable outcome of systems that extract without reciprocity. Systems that depend on your adaptability, your emotional intelligence, your capacity to hold more than your share, right? Over time, your capacity becomes a resource others depend on, and your needs become secondary, optional, inconvenient. So instead of asking, what's wrong with me? This work invites a different reflection. The question that we need to ask is, what has this environment required of me? What kinds of success depended on my silence? What kinds of praise rewarded my overextension? Burnout is not a character flaw. It is an environmental signal, right? And the body often notices long before the mind is ready to admit it. Now, rehumanization is not retreat, and it is not disengagement. It is also not self-indulgence. Rehumanization is the restoration of your inner authority. It is the moment you stop treating your body, your emotions, and spirit like tools, and you start treating them as sources of intelligence. Rehumanization asks uncomfortable questions. What am I carrying that is no longer mine? Where have I been confused about my responsibility? Where have I participated in my self-erasure? Who am I without constant usefulness? So these questions are not meant to destabilize you. They're meant to return you to yourself. Because a life organized entirely around usefulness will eventually cost you your sense of aliveness. We were never meant to be constantly available. We were meant to be whole. Because reclaiming our humanity eventually requires us to reconsider the ways that we've been taught to survive. Now, Black women know how to fight. Black women know how to fight through exhaustion and grief and disrespect and scarcity, instability and erasure. Now, those strategies didn't just come from nowhere. They were learned because they were necessary. They helped many of us survive conditions that were never meant to be survivable. But survival was never meant to be the destination. It was meant to be the bridge. But somewhere along the way, survival became the standard, and then the expectation. So many of us were praised most when we were pushing past ourselves, when we were holding everything together. And then over time, fighting stopped being something we did in response to danger, and it became the posture we held all the time. We stayed braced. So the question shifts, not can I fight through this, but what is this fight asking me to sacrifice? Beyond survival is not weakness. Beyond survival is wisdom. It's learning how to fight for your life without fighting yourself in the process. Now, one of the first places that shifts begins is not in the mind, but in the body. So before the mind catches up, the body knows. And now this is not metaphor. It's lived experience. The body registers what we override. Tension in the shoulders, a tightening in the chest, a heaviness in the gut. Fatigue doesn't lift with just rest, right? That's something that our body registers. Those sensations are not random. They are communication. And for many Black women, the body has been treated less like a witness and more like an instrument, something to push, something to discipline, something to demand from. We learn to override hunger and ignore fatigue, dismissing pain as inconvenience. But listening to the body is not indulgence. It is intelligence, because your nervous system is constantly gathering information about safety and alignment and threat, even when your mind is trying to rationalize its way forward. The body often knows the truth long before we're emotionally ready to accept it. Now, once we begin listening to the body, we start to understand that clarity requires something deeper than just willpower. Before you reclaim anything, before you set that boundary, before you walk away, before you make that bold move, your body has to feel safe enough to choose. Now, clarity is difficult when your nervous system is dysregulated, when you are braced, right? When you're overstimulated, when you're exhausted. So, I had a moment recently where I wanted something sweet, not casually, but urgently. And instead of shaming myself, instead of overriding it, I paused long enough to ask, what is my body trying to do for me right now? So sugar is fast energy. It shifts your chemistry quickly. So my body wasn't weak. It was attempting regulation. And that distinction matters. Because if I shame the signal, I miss the wisdom. Reclamation does not begin with force. It begins with stabilization. Slow the chemistry. Stabilize the body. Lower the noise. Then decide. Then move. Then speak. When the body feels safe, choice widens. And when the body begins to settle, something else becomes available to us. The power of the pause. Now, the pause is not an absence of action. It's a shift in power. Now, for many Black women, pausing can feel counterintuitive. We've been conditioned to respond quickly, to anticipate the needs before they are named, to smooth things over before they escalate. So pausing can feel risky, like things will unravel if you don't intervene. But the pause interrupts reflex, that automatic yes, that habitual explanation, the urge to fix something that may not actually be yours to repair. Now, for me, the pause arrived as burnout, not exactly as choice. I took an intentional retreat to Costa Rica while caretaking for my mother, not to escape my life, but to interrupt a pattern. And what became clear in that quiet was this: I had mastered endurance, but I had stopped listening. The pause didn't make me less responsible. It made me more honest. It showed me what clarity sounds like, what it looks like when urgency isn't speaking over it. Because response is different from reaction. Reaction is automatic. Response is intentional. So the pause is the space where response becomes possible. Now, because once we pause long enough to hear ourselves clearly, right, that makes available a shift in how we act and interact in our relationships. The walk away comes before the walk away. So the walk away is the way you move through your life when you're no longer available for negotiation around your worth. It's the way your presence carries clarity before you even explain yourself. I know who I am. I know what I bring, and I'm not auditioning for your respect. Now, for many Black women, that kind of grounded presence was never modeled as safe. We were often taught to soften ourselves, to manage reactions before they arrive, so we learn to over-explain our way in. Now, this is where courage enters. You know, Maya Angelou once said, without courage, you cannot practice any other virtue with consistency, because courage allows you to maintain your walk away, even when it disrupts familiar dynamics, even when it unsettles expectations, even when it costs approval. And sometimes, even when you move with that clarity, you're going to find yourself in spaces that can't meet you there. So that's when this second movement becomes necessary, the walk away. The walk away is not reactive. It is a movement that comes after clarity, after acceptance, after taking account. It does not require you to convince anybody, and it doesn't wait for permission. Sometimes the hardest part of the walk away is resisting the urge to explain, because many of us want our reasoning acknowledged. We want our decision to feel reasonable in somebody else's eyes. But clarity doesn't live in the why. Clarity lives in what is. Now, if I'm honest, learning that lesson has required me to confront one of my own habits. I am an over-explainer in recovery, right? I learned how to explain everything. Why I was setting a boundary, why I was ending a relationship, why I needed space. And baby, I used to be the queen of the long text message. Occupational hazard, I'm an attorney. Exhibit A, your behavior. Exhibit B, my peace. And after I hit send, it felt like I should follow with the court. Respectfully submitted, Makeda Crane. But what I'm learning is that over-explaining is not a power move. It doesn't guarantee understanding, and it often invites negotiation when clarity already existed. Sometimes explanation is simply asking permission after you've already decided. And the walk away doesn't require permission. It requires honesty. Because eventually clarity pushes us towards that deeper honesty about what we're willing to keep building our lives around. Walking away doesn't always come from certainty. Often it comes from uncertainty, from admitting that a situation actually offers you little to no value. And this is where something important happens. We begin to understand the difference between acceptance and resignation. Resignation says, hey, well, this is all there is. Acceptance says, this is what is. Acceptance creates clarity because you cannot respond skillfully to what you refuse to see. And once you can see clearly, a different question becomes possible. Where is my agency now? So let me make this concrete. In May of last year, I was let go from my role at a federal agency where just weeks earlier, I had been recognized for the quality of my work. My competence wasn't in question. My integrity wasn't in question. My contribution wasn't in question. And that distinction matters because when something ends without failure, it forces a different kind of reckoning. It asks, what am I no longer willing to build my life around? For me, that moment clarified something. I could continue organizing my life around systems that benefit from my overfunctioning, or I could redirect my energy towards building something that does not require my depletion as proof of value. Now, once we tell ourselves the truth about our lives, the next step becomes learning how to care for ourselves differently inside that truth. So, if survival taught us how to endure, love has to teach us how to care. Now, for many of us, love was conditional. Maybe it was tied to usefulness, to achievement, to how much we could carry without complaint. So really, self-love became transactional, something to access only after exhaustion. Reparenting interrupts that logic. Reparenting is a practice of offering yourself what may not have been consistently available to you during your childhood. Protection, attunement, permission, patience. Radical self-love does not mean that life just suddenly becomes easy breezy. It means you stop punishing yourself for having limits. You stop withholding care for yourself, right? This is not indulgence, it's repair. And when care becomes part of how we live, well, something else begins to return. And you know what that something else is? Joy. Joy is not extra. Joy is a practice. For many Black women, we learn to delay it, to downplay it. But joy is not a reward for endurance. Joy is a commitment to aliveness. Joy refuses a lie that your life exists only to be endured. Joy becomes how we replenish the well. And when joy becomes practice, something interesting happens. Your discernment sharpens. You start noticing sooner when something drains you. You tolerate less. You tolerate what deadens your spirit. So joy becomes your compass. Now, because a life rooted in joy doesn't just turn us away from the world, right? Doesn't just do that. It really changes how we engage with the world. And for Black women, that matters deeply because we have been asked to love publicly while injustice continued uninterrupted. Reclaiming the well is not only personal, it is political. Because when you stop consenting to depletion, systems that depended on your exhaustion feel it. This is justice lived quietly. So, if I had to say, what are those key practices that are essential to reclaiming the well? What I would name is the pause, exercising your boundaries, returning to yourself. Now, the pause interrupts reflex and creates space for truth. Boundaries clarify what is and what is not available to you based on your own terms. And returning to yourself means coming back into relationship with your own body, wisdom, and humanity. And after all of this reflection, the work ultimately brings us back to a very simple place. Reclaiming the well is not about becoming someone new. It's about coming back into full possession of yourself, back to what is essential, back to what is worthy, back to what was always yours. Returning home means listening differently, choosing differently, choosing yourself with clarity and with compassion and without apology. Living differently, not from depletion, but from discernment, not from performance, but from truth. So, good news. You are allowed to live from fullness. You are allowed to honor your own humanity. And you are allowed to stop surviving, which should have never required your depletion. You are allowed to come back to yourself fully, fiercely, and on your own terms, because you were never meant to be the well that runs dry. Drink.